Good morning, everybody. We're live from the birdhouse, and today we're talking about the Monarch Butterfly. It's the end of July, so this tends to be a good time to go out and see monarchs and find their eggs and find their caterpillars. Curious if any of you guys have seen much monarch activity. I know personally I haven't seen all too much. And I haven't gotten a lot of reports from customers who've seen all that many either. So I'm curious if you guys have seen any monarchs in your backyard, if you found any eggs or found any caterpillars, all that good stuff. And of course, we always want to know what kind of other things you're seeing in your yards or as you're out and about hiking and in the wilderness. So you can put those in the comments, or you can always just say hi as well. So let's get started here talking about the monarch butterfly. The first thing I'd like to talk about with butterflies in general is their metamorphosis. So butterflies go through what's called a complete metamorphosis, where each stage of their life cycle looks completely different than the one before. So they are an insect, which means they've got those 3 body segments, they've got the 6 legs, they've got the 2 pairs of wings. So they're in that big order of insects, and they start their life off as an egg, and out of that egg will hatch their larva, which in this case is going to be the caterpillar. That caterpillar will pupate and form a chrysalis, and out of that chrysalis will hatch the adult monarch butterfly. So with butterfly gardening in general, it's important to plant plants for each stage of the life cycle. For monarch butterflies, it's pretty easy though, because they are dependent on milkweed. And so milkweed not only will provide the nutrients that the caterpillar needs to eat the leaves, but they'll also feed from the nectar from the milkweed flowers as well, which is wonderful. And you'll probably want to plant more than just milkweed to give them a source of nectar, at least give the adults a source of nectar. And at the end of the presentation, we'll talk about some different plants that can help attract monarch adults because they bring in nectar. And of course, if you have any that work well in your yard to attract butterflies in general, absolutely throw those in the comments, because we love to know what kind of plants you've got in your backyard that work well for your butterfly garden. In general, with butterfly gardening, each species has different requirements. So if you want to plant something for monarch butterflies, that can be very different from what you wanted to plant for black swallowtails, as far as their host plant goes, or the plant that they'll lay their eggs on and that caterpillar or larva will eat. So monarch butterfly, it's pretty easy, because if you can plant some milkweed, then that is what the butterflies need to lay their eggs. So the larvae of butterflies are called caterpillars, and the caterpillars, basically their main job, their only job, is to just eat and eat and eat. And if you were to look closely at what a caterpillar looks like, what their mouth looks like, they have these chewing mouth parts. So they don't have teeth or anything like that, but they do have mouth parts that are designed to chew, and they just chew plant material while they are in that caterpillar stage. And the adults, on the other hand, have a proboscis, or a straw-like mouth, that is used to suck nectar out of plants. Butterflies and moths as well are part of an insect order called Lepidoptera, which means it's scale wing. That's what it translates to. And if you were to ever look really closely at a butterfly wing underneath a microscope, it is covered with tiny little colorful scales, and that's what gives them their color. So that's why it's important to be very careful with butterflies and try not to handle their wings or anything like that. If you ever have, you've probably found that there's a little powder that gets off in your hands, and that's these little scales that are covering their wings, and those don't ever grow back. So it is a way for their wings to be protected. So it is important to try not to handle the butterflies because of that. And then before talking about the monarch, I always like to talk about the differences between butterflies and moths. Of course, there can be exceptions to the rules, but in general, this is how you tell the difference. So most people will say, well, butterflies are really brightly colored, and moths tend to be drab and kind of boring looking, but that's not always the case. These insects here all along the top, those are all different species of butterflies, even that white cabbage white butterfly that people tend to mistake for a moth flying around your garden. Those are butterflies. And moths can be very brightly colored and beautiful as well. So in general, the way to tell the difference between butterflies and moths are butterflies have an antenna that has some kind of ball at the end or projection at the end. So at the end of that antenna, it gets larger. Most butterflies, in fact, all the butterflies we have here in our area, in the upstate New York area, and in New York in general, are diurnal, or they're active during the day. When they're at rest, butterflies will hold their wings up over their body, like this picture here of the monarch butterfly. They've got their wings held over their body, and they will form a chrysalis, or a hardened shell, when it's time for them to pupate. Now, moths, on the other hand, have an antenna that is very straight, so it doesn't have any kind of projection at the end, or it looks like a feather, and I'll show you some photos of what those look like. Most moths are nocturnal, but we do have a couple that don't follow those rules here. The hummingbird clearwing moth is one. The Virginia centuccia moth is another one. Some day-flying moths that we do happen to have here in the area. So there are exceptions to the rules as far as moths go. When at rest, most moths will spread their wings out over their body so they don't hold them up over their body while at rest. And they'll form a cocoon when it's time to pupate. So they'll form a hardened shell, but it's covered with some kind of fibers. So here's some photos showing you some of those different characteristics. So here's a butterfly. On the far left, it has the antenna with the projections at the end, so you can see how it gets bigger at the end. It has some little balls there at the end of the antenna. And then here's what the moth antenna looks like on the right-hand side here and in the middle. So it either looks like a feather coming out of the moth's head, or it is just a completely straight antenna. And then here's a black swallowtail coming out of its chrysalis, its hardened shell here in the bottom left. And then here's a version of a cocoon here in the bottom right-hand corner. And a lot of the times the cocoons will be wrapped up in some kind of a leaf or some kind of material, some kind of dried material in the woods, on the forest floor, or in on the side of a tree, something like that. So these are the differences between butterflies and moths. So now you can impress all of your friends. But today we're talking about the monarch butterfly. And monarch butterflies are really large, they're really showy, so you've probably seen them around. They're in the family called brush-footed butterflies. And what that means is that they have a reduced pair of forelegs. So when they're at rest, you can see on the picture on the bottom here, it almost looks like the monarch only has 2 pairs of legs. So that the first of legs that they have, the first pair of legs, their forelegs, they actually kind of tuck them up into their body. So if you look really closely at the monarch butterfly, when they're sitting on a flower, it really looks like they only have 2 pairs of legs, but they do have 3 pairs of legs. So they do have 6 legs total. They are bright orange. They're one of the largest butterflies we have in the area. And you can find them in any kind of open habitat. You can find them in backyards. Any place that has milkweed plants is perfect habitat for the monarch butterfly. You can also tell the difference between male and female. So females, and this is a female on the right-hand side here, they tend to have thicker veins in their wings, whereas the males will have thinner veins. So on the left here is a male. But really what I find to be the biggest difference between male and female are that the males will have these little scent pouches here on their hind wing, which it will emit a pheromone to help attract females. So if you're looking at the butterfly, you can see this from both when their wings are spread open or when they're at rest over their body. If you see a little black dot there on their hind wing, that is where the pheromone comes out to help attract the female. So that is the male that has that, and the female does not. Their life cycle will start off as an egg, and if you're lucky enough to see a monarch butterfly laying its egg, this is what it looks like. They will curl their abdomen up under the leaf of a milkweed plant and lay their egg. And so here's the female doing that. You can see her abdomen is curved there. They will almost all the time lay their egg on the underside of the milkweed plant. And there's a little zoom in here. You can see of her abdomen, and there's a tiny egg that is being laid there. One female monarch alone will lay about 500 eggs in her lifespan, but only about 1 in 20 will make it to adulthood. So others get predated upon by ants, by spiders, even other monarch butterfly caterpillars. If there's a tiny egg on the milkweed and you've got a large monarch caterpillar also on that milkweed, they can chomp right through it without it even knowing sometimes. So very few of those eggs will actually mature and make it to adulthood. The eggs need to be laid on milkweed, and that egg will hatch within 3 to 4 days. And so when you first see the egg, they're almost a little spherical shape, or they're kind of more like an egg shape. And they do have tiny little ridges that run down them. So if you look really, really closely, you can see the ridges of the egg. And then before the egg is about to hatch, you'll start to see the caterpillar inside. So you can see that the egg starts to get a little bit more clear. And there's a tiny little caterpillar inside. You can see its little head is about to break through. And the caterpillar stage lasts for about 10 to 14 days. It is temperature dependent. So this whole life cycle is temperature dependent. If it's pretty warm outside, it will be faster. If you are raising caterpillars, these monarch caterpillars indoors where it's cooler, it will be longer of a life cycle because it is temperature dependent. So the warmer it is, the faster it goes. So the caterpillar stage lasts for 10 to 14 days, and there's what are called 5 larval instars, and that is as the caterpillar grows, they will be different sizes. And the first thing that the caterpillar does when it hatches out of its egg is it tends to eat the shell. So it starts eating right away as soon as it is out of its egg there. It'll even eat the eggshell and then begin eating the leaves of the milkweed plant. So larval instars are the different sizes. As the caterpillar grows, they actually do have to shed their skin in order to keep growing. So they do that 4 times, giving them 5 larval instars. So as they grow, they do shed their skin. So you might see every once in a while a skin shed on your milkweed plant, but you probably won't see those because they tend to eat those too. So they'll shed their skin and then they eat that. It's full of nutrients, and then they'll continue to eat the milkweed plant. So there are different sizes depending on which instar they are in. They tend to have the same kind of coloration. Some caterpillars of different species, as they grow and have different instars, will look different and have kind of different coloration. But the monarch tends to stay the same, where they've got these black and yellow and white stripes. So they do grow in different instars. Before they are about to pupate or make their chrysalis, they enter what's called their J stage. This is when they hang upside down. They spin a little bit of a web there. They'll hang upside down in a shape of a J, and then they start to shed their skin a final time. So this is what it looks like. Just taken with some different photos there. They'll be hanging upside down, and all of a sudden they'll start to wiggle, and their skin will split kind of by their head, and will start to kind of make its way up their body until it's at the very top of where they are connected with that little webbing. So I've got a video here, a speed lapse video showing it happen. So let's see if this works here. Perfect. You can see the skin is just starting to split there. And so inside there is that pupa, and it'll stop wiggling after a little bit of time, and it'll start to harden into that shape of the chrysalis. We're so used to seeing that bright green chrysalis with the gold edges. And there it goes. So it's pretty cool. And the whole that whole process, as far as going from the caterpillar hanging in its J stage to that chrysalis, is only a few minutes. It really doesn't take very long at all. So if you've ever raised the monarch caterpillars, you might find that, oh, there's a whole bunch in their J stage. You leave for half an hour, and then all of a sudden they've turned. They tend to do it in the mornings. I've rarely seen them ever do that in the afternoon or evening. So if you're waiting and waiting to see when they're going to do it, it's usually first thing in the morning is when they start to pupate like that. So it doesn't take long at all. So it's pretty amazing. And the last part of their life cycle is the adult, or the butterfly. So in general, butterflies don't live very long. In the summer generation, and we'll talk about the different generations of the monarch butterfly, they're only going to live for about 2 to 5 weeks, with 5 weeks being a pretty long time for a butterfly. However, that migratory population that flies all the way down to Mexico and starts the migration back up north will live anywhere from 8 to 9 months, which is pretty amazing. And so that final generation that is a migratory population is a stockier build. You can hear their wings when they fly. They've got really heavy duty wings, and they will live quite a bit longer than the general monarch butterflies will. So monarch butterflies are also toxic. They ingest milkweed plants, which are toxic to most vertebrates. So as the caterpillar is eating those toxic leaves, the milkweed that has that toxin in it, the caterpillars are ingesting all of that toxin, and they themselves will become poisonous. And the monarchs have what's called aposematic coloration, which is a warning to predators. So while they're toxic to most vertebrates, they're not toxic to things like spiders and other insects. There are mimics of the monarch butterfly. The one that we have around here is the viceroy, and the viceroy is going to be smaller than the monarch butterfly. So if you see something that looks like a monarch, but it's about the size, say, of the butterflies that you have in your yard, it could very well be a viceroy. And the defining characteristic here of the viceroy is in that hind wing that they have, there's a stripe that goes through it. So you can see here in their hind wing, there is a line that goes all the way through it, both when their wings are out and then when they are at rest as well. So just the viceroy has that. The monarch butterfly does not have that stripe there. There are predators of the monarch butterfly, even though they are toxic. So spiders are definitely a predator. Assassin bugs. So you might say, what is an assassin bug? This thing on the top of the page here, this photo here, this is a type of assassin bug called a wheel bug. You can look at its back. It has what almost looks like a big wheel on the back of it. And assassin bugs, you might be able to see its mouth here. You can see its little head. It has kind of a small head here. And then there's a projection that's kind of going down towards its body. When we're talking about insects, they have different mouth parts. So that caterpillar has those chewing mouth parts. The adult butterfly has a siphon-like proboscis that's almost like a straw that will suck out nutrients from flowers. Assassin bugs almost have those same straw-like mouth parts, but they use that to pierce into the skin of other insects and suck out the insides, which is pretty gross. But that is what this assassin bug does. So it's got a really strong mouthpart that can pierce the skin of caterpillars. There's things called tachinid flies that will lay their eggs inside caterpillars. They are also wasps will do that same thing. And other monarch caterpillars can also be considered predators, because if there's a very small caterpillar, like I said, that it just hatched out, or even an egg on a milkweed plant, those larger milkweed or those larger monarch caterpillars can sometimes chew right through them and not even realize it. So there are definitely predators. Now, while most mammals can't eat monarch butterflies, there are some exceptions, and these are all found down south in Mexico, where the monarchs will overwinter. There are some predators that have adapted to be able to eat monarch butterflies. There is the black-eared mouse, there's the black-backed oriole, and the black-headed grosbeak. These are all vertebrates that are able to eat the monarch butterfly. So the monarch butterfly does have quite a few predators there up against them. As far as their migration, the monarchs will travel up north, most of them coming from Mexico, and they usually start that around March and April. And that first generation will start making its way up north. As they start their migration up north, they will lay eggs on milkweed. Those eggs will develop into caterpillars and then more monarchs, and they continue that migration north. So by the time they get to us up here in upstate New York, we are about on that third or so generation. So we've got the third and fourth generations that are up here in our area. So it's really neat that the monarchs that we see can be 2, 3, 4 generations removed from the ones that went down south in the previous year. As the temperatures warm and daylight hours extend, that is what makes them start to migrate, just like birds. And the migratory population will continue laying eggs up as they go north. So as far as going back down south, we will see the peak of the monarch population migrating through our area in the Rochester, New York area around the 3rd to 15th of September. So that is when we've got the most in our area, because there's some that are migrating from Canada, from all the way up there, from north there down south to our area. So that's when you can expect to see the biggest mass of monarch butterflies, is beginning to the middle of September. They fly down to Mexico for the winter, which, depending on where they begin, can be a journey of 3,000 miles or more. They can travel anywhere from 50 to 100 miles a day. A lot of that is dependent on wind speed and weather conditions. But if you've got monarchs that are all the way up north in Winnipeg, that migration can go from August all the way through November. So they could be migrating for months until they get down to Mexico. So it's pretty amazing. There are to track monarchs with tags, and these aren't tags like you would put on a sea turtle or something like that. These are little stickers, so they have to be attached and then recovered at some point from the animal in order to get the data points. But you can purchase tags yourself from a site called Monarch Watch. Tags are pretty inexpensive. They're about $15 if you want 25 of them. And the tags don't ship to you until the migratory population in your area is there. So you won't get the tags until you know that it's the right types of monarchs that are flowing through the area. The tags are just little circular stickers, and they're attached to what's called the discal cell of the wing of the monarch butterfly. So if you look closely at their wing, it's attached, the cells that are attached to their body, the wing cells there. There's one that almost looks like a little mitten, and that is called the discal cell. And it's been found, if you put the sticker on the discal cell there, that is the best place where it doesn't really impede the flight of the monarch. So that's the best place to attach it to the wing. And as monarchs are tagged, if they are recovered or if they're seen on a plant, there is a 6-digit letter and number combination that is specific to each sticker that can be recorded and then submitted to the Monarch Watch site. So there are people down in Mexico in the overwintering areas that are paid to look for these monarchs with tags on them. And then there's people just around the country who, if they happen to see one and they are familiar with the monarch tagging process, can hopefully get close enough to see those the information on the sticker. And when that information is put into a database, it can help tell where the monarch came from, where it had been seen, and so it is quite an interesting process. And if you do tag a monarch and it happens to be recovered somewhere, you do get a notification sent to you by the Monarch Watch site. As far as the winter habitat goes for monarchs, most of them like this very specific habitat, and they like what are called oyamel fir trees. They like a very specific elevation, which tends to be nearly 2 miles above sea level, and it creates this perfect microclimate for them. And the temperatures increases and decreases is what can cause them to use their fat reserve. So if it gets too cold, they can start burning up the fat in their body, and then that can be devastating for their populations. But they do like a very specific type of habitat down in Mexico for where they overwinter. So they overwinter in very few places, and that's what makes them so susceptible to habitat loss and to population declines, because if these habitats are being logged illegally, which a lot of them are, that is the only place where these monarchs will roost. So they're dependent on a very small patch of area in a very specific part of the world. So habitat loss has made a huge impact on their populations. In these winter habitats, millions of monarchs will congregate. Tens of thousands can land on each tree. And if you're lucky enough, I've never seen this happen, but I know it's happened to people around here where, as the monarchs are migrating, sometimes at night they will all congregate on a certain branch of a tree. And so you might see hundreds or even thousands of monarchs sometimes in one part of a tree. Sometimes it's for over the night, sometimes it's only for a matter of moments, or it could be hours. But you can sometimes see a little bit of this activity here during migration season as they're going back down south. So that would be around that peak time here of the early to mid-September would be your best chance of seeing something like that. Down in their winter habitat is where tags are collected and recorded. People are paid down there to retrieve the tags, to peel the tags carefully off the wings of the monarchs, and then they collect those data points. Monarch populations are definitely going down. While they've been fluctuating, they have been on a decline, and this does change year over year depending on many different factors, but just within the past week, the Monarch Butterfly has been officially listed as endangered by the IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature. So they have this list called the Red List, and the Red List has species that are threatened or endangered. So they list them in different ways, and the monarch they put as an endangered species, and the monarch is really threatened due to habitat loss and change in climate, because they are so dependent on that one type of microclimate. Any kind of change to that climate can make a huge impact on the populations of these butterflies. So here's a statement that I thought was pretty interesting and really gives you the idea of what's happening here with monarch butterflies. This is from the IUCN in their press release about listing the monarch butterfly as endangered. They said the endangered migratory monarch butterfly is a subspecies of the monarch butterfly. The native population, known for its migrations from Mexico and California in the winter to summer breeding grounds throughout the United States and Canada, has shrunk by between 22 and 72% throughout or over the past decade. Legal and illegal logging and deforestation to make space for agriculture and urban development has already destroyed substantial acres of the butterfly's winter shelter in Mexico and California, while pesticides and herbicides used in intensive agriculture across the range kill butterflies and milkweed, the host plants that the larvae of the monarch butterfly feed on. The western population is at greatest risk of extinction, having declined by an estimated 99.9% from as many as 10 million individuals to 1,914 butterflies between the 1980s and 2021. The larger eastern population also shrunk by 84% from 1996 to 2014. Concern remains as whether enough butterflies survive to maintain the populations and prevent extinction. So the butterflies have been listed as an endangered species. This just happened. So this is a brand new news story. So what can you do to help? The monarch butterfly is dependent on milkweed for survival. So planting these host plants is key to attracting and keeping monarch butterflies around for generations to come. Female butterflies find appropriate host plants for their eggs by the chemoreceptors on the backs of their legs and on their abdomen. So butterflies can almost taste what type of plant they're on with these receptors that are on their legs and on their abdomens where they're laying their eggs. So pretty interesting stuff. So they can tell when they land on a milkweed plant that that's the appropriate plant for them to lay their egg. You definitely want to plant for all stages of development, so blend host plants and nectar producing plants. Right now you might find the monarchs on your milkweed as far as the caterpillars and the eggs, but I know if my common milkweed, the blooms have all fizzled out, so the monarch adults are going to be dependent on nectar producing plants. So you want to have nectar producing plants, but also the host plants, because the adults may pass by and sip on nectar, but providing habitat for egg laying, mating, and roosting will provide habitat all year long. And those are going to be those host plants where they lay their eggs. You definitely want to avoid pesticides if you are trying to attract butterflies. Pesticides will kill the insects you don't want, but they will kill all the insects that you would have in your yard. So you absolutely want to avoid that. There are some butterflies, not monarchs, but there are some that will spend the winter here as adults, or they will spend the winter in their chrysalis. So having a brush pile can help with a variation of having different types of butterflies. Supplying water is great with a butterfly puddler. And you want to have a variety of plants that bloom throughout the season. So if you have plants that start blooming in early spring through the late fall, that is going to be ideal for attracting butterflies. And the colors do matter. It's been found that purple and yellow are the preferred flower colors of butterflies, and white, blue, and red follow in terms of their favorites. So somebody figured that out. As far as the plants to go to attract the monarch butterflies, this is your common milkweed, and this is the one that people tend to have the most luck with as far as getting the monarchs to lay their eggs on this. The leaves are really big, so there's a lot of food material there for the caterpillar to develop. And common milkweed people can be hit or miss with in their garden. It can be a little unruly and it can be hard to control, but it's easy to grow. So if you've got a nice wild patch that you don't mind some milkweed growing, absolutely consider growing some common milkweed. The flowers smell gorgeous. They kind of smell like lilacs, and the seeds are super easy to get and to grow. So right now they're starting to develop their seed pods, and as we get into the fall and even winter, you might find in fields these big seed pods that are just bursting with seeds. You can pull those. You want to keep them in your refrigerator over the winter because they do need that season of cold in order to germinate. But super easy to gather seeds. So if there's any one type of plant that you could plant to attract the monarch, common milkweed is really the way to go. However, there is a swamp milkweed. Leaves are definitely thinner, but they will lay their eggs on this as well. My swamp milkweed is still in bloom in my backyard. It's looking very lovely. And you can find this in garden centers pretty easily as well. So swamp milkweed you can sometimes find in different colors too. Sometimes it's white or I've seen some that are an annual swamp milkweed that are kind of yellowish and red, but this kind of pink color is what you're most likely going to find. That's our native variety of swamp milkweed. Much easier to control in the garden. Really, really beautiful pink blooms. And butterfly weed is another species, bright, bright orange. So it's a really beautiful flower for your garden. Again, seeds are super easy to gather. They will make these seed pods as well. Their seed pods are thinner than the common milkweed, and they stick right up in the air. So they're pretty easy to find if you know where a patch of butterfly weed was earlier in the season. And this is another plant that can easily be found in garden centers. So butterfly weed. And then there's the nectar plants for adults, and there's a lot of different nectar plants that you can get. Any kind of butterfly plants, anything that's labeled a butterfly plant at your local nursery, it's probably going to be a great nectar producing plant for the adults. Some popular ones, I love my Joe Pye weed in my garden. That's on the left here. That's starting to bloom right now. That can get really nice and tall. It's super easy to grow. You can find that in garden centers too. I've never had a place where I haven't grown Joe Pye weed or planted Joe Pye weed where it hasn't really thrived. So absolutely, Joe Pye weed is great. It has lots and lots of blooms, and you might find it if you're out hiking. You can find it in wetlands. Usually you can find it amongst the cattails. You can find it in fields amongst the goldenrod. It's starting to bloom right now. Butterfly bush is always popular. That's on the top here, and it's got a picture of a monarch on it. Coneflowers are popular. This is a purple coneflower, black-eyed Susans, something else you can plant. There's lots of different nectar producing plants for butterflies. So if you've got one that works best for you, I'd love to know what that is in the comments. And then finally, I thought I would mention invasives as well. There's an invasive that is taking the area by storm. If you're on the East Coast, probably no matter where you're watching from right now, you probably have this around. This is called black swallowwort. And black swallowwort, it's almost like a vine. It'll start to grow pretty tall, and then the top starts to vine off, and it tends to flop over. It's pretty thin leaves, and it'll have these really long, thin seed pods, which you could see right now. When it's in bloom, it has these little tiny purple flowers. And black swallowwort is not only bad in general because it's an invasive and it will really take over native species and native flowers. And, locally, if you walk through Mendon Ponds, for example, there's black swallowwort all over the place. So not only does it choke out other things, but it's also closely related to these milkweed species that the monarch butterflies will lay their eggs on. So they're known to lay their eggs on this black swallowwort, and it doesn't provide the nutrients that the caterpillars need to survive. So unfortunately, they'll lay their eggs on this, the caterpillars hatch, they can eat the leaves of the black swallowwort, but it doesn't provide them the nutrients that they need to grow. So they ultimately will starve. So if you see this in your garden, definitely be on the lookout. If you're not sure, there's a lot of really good plant identification apps that you can download on your phone for free to help you identify them. But this is called black swallowwort, and it can make an impact. Pulling that, I would definitely pull it from your garden if you see any of it, because it can take over your garden really, really quickly as well. So that's everything I have prepared for you guys today. I want to thank you for watching. If you have questions, you can put those in the comments. And let's see, we'll start this here. We've got our monarch butterfly picture up here. Stephanie's on here. She says, fascinating, and says, oh, wow, didn't know the skin split. Yes, the whole process of them pupating is pretty incredible. To see it is a pretty interesting thing to watch, to see how their skin splits, and underneath is just this, it almost looks like a bright green grub that just kind of wiggles around. So really, really cool. Bonnie says, one year we did see part of the migration. Fascinating and a wonder for sure. Yeah, I bet that would be really neat. It's amazing if you go out on the right day, if it's a nice sunny day during that peak migration season, and if you're in a field where, say, there's a lot of goldenrod, because that's when a lot of the goldenrod is in bloom, there can be monarchs just everywhere. So that's one of the reasons I keep goldenrod in my garden. It just kind of shows up there. That can also get quite unruly, which I have found. So I do pull a good amount of it, but I still keep a nice patch because it does produce the nectar that these butterflies need in the fall. So that's something to consider too. The goldenrod, sometimes considered a weed, but it is a really great nectar producing plant. Barb says they are beautiful, so beautiful. Stephanie says, on one of our trips to Maui in December, the upcountry region was swarming with monarch butterflies. Oh, that's wonderful. How great is that to see? Barb says, I wish I didn't have to go to work. I'll have to watch when I get home from work. Well, that's what's nice about these. You can watch them whenever you want. You can watch them at your convenience. Lynn is on. She says, does it matter that my milkweed doesn't bloom? It's growing on the edge of the woods. Do have blooms in my garden though? Thanks. Nope, it doesn't matter because so I've got some that blooms. I have some that doesn't bloom. It seems like if it doesn't get a lot of sun, you might not get the flowers, but as long as you've got the milkweed there, that you've got the plant there, that's all the butterflies need to lay their eggs on. So it's perfectly fine that it's not blooming. Ed is on. He says, last year during the fall migration, a few dozen monarchs stayed overnight in a tree at my son's house in Honeoye Falls. He managed a quick cell phone photo just as the light faded. Pretty amazing to see that many together at one time. Great show, and as always, learned a few new things. Thanks. Of course, you're welcome. Thank you for watching. So that's cool. So Ed did get to see a whole group of them roosting or his son got to see it. A nice group of the monarchs roosting while they were going through their migration. So that's cool. Vicky is on. She says, my peewee hydrangea tree is in bloom right now. The swallowtails went back and forth between that and the butterfly bushes yesterday. Fun to watch. And my low-cost form of entertainment. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I've got a butterfly bush, I guess you'd call it. It's more like a stalk that's starting to bloom. It's a pretty sad-looking bush, but it is in bloom right now, and there are butterflies absolutely coming to it. They do love the nectar from those butterfly bush. So it looks like that's everybody's comments and questions for the day. We'll be back on Saturday with another broadcast where we will share your photos, and we'll concentrate on goldfinches because the goldfinches are nesting right now. They're definitely singing, and they're coming to feeders, so we can give you some tips on how you can attract more of them, and we'll talk more about their biology and their habits and all that good stuff. So we'll be back on Saturday. Until then, have a great week, and we'll talk to you